Hi, I'm City Councilor G.T. Bynum. I was the chair of the City Council Capital Improvement Program Task Force, selected by my colleagues to manage that process. And today, we're here on TGov to talk about the process that went into putting the program that is up for voter consideration on the ballot in November, how that was put together, and what it means for Tulsa. With me today is Matt Lichty, who's the Planning and Coordination Manager for the Engineering Services Department, and Gary Hamer, who's the Capital Planning Manager for the city's Finance Department. They're actually going to help me with the details on all of this. First, I'd like to start off by talking about how we came to an initial list of projects to work with. This is a process that really goes back several years. Before the City Council ever became involved with it, the Mayor's administration was working to develop a project list. Gary, you might talk about that.
Thank you, Councilor Bynum. Yes, as part of the city's annual capital improvement process, we go out and visit with all of the departments in the city with regards to their potential capital needs. Those might include facilities, and that would mean a facility like our Performing Arts Center, our Gilcrease Museum, or even the Convention Center and the BOK Center, as well as our major infrastructure, our streets, water and sewer system, and then our parks system as well. And then the other departments that have capital needs as well are really the fire department, police departments, and really all that is rolling stock. The patrol cars that you see on the street and the fire apparatus that respond to emergencies and fires. And so during that process, in that discussion with them, we assemble from the administration in those departments, we assemble a list of needs and then compile a list of projects, and then we have a committee that annually reviews those in the Mayor's administration. We discuss those with the departments, and then they come in to the Mayor's administration and discuss that with the Mayor's administration and talk about their priorities and sort of go through their justifications for their estimates on their project costs. And then the Mayor's administration then takes that and ranks that, and we eventually put that into the what's called the annual city's capital improvements plan, and then that is then presented to the City Council as part of the budget process. And we maintain an inventory, really a long-range inventory of all projects, which is extensively long. We don't publish all that, but it's in the neighborhood of $9 to $10 billion, and those would be projects that could have time horizons as long as 40 or 50 years away. And from that list, we cut that down to what we call a high priority list, and then that's ultimately what makes it into the CIP, and then is then passed on to the City Council annually at the 1st of May.
And what was the dollar amount on the high priority list that you guys developed this year?
It was about $2.5 billion.
And so in December, the mayor and the 9 city councilors had a joint meeting, and really to kick off our involvement in this process. And we discussed kind of amongst the 10 of us what we viewed as the top needs, the areas of focus, and how did we want to go about putting this proposal together. And a few things that all of us agreed upon between both branches of government was that we wanted to continue the same commitment to the level of street funding that we've had over the last 5 years. In 2008, voters approved the Fix Our Streets program, which has put approximately $452 million into street infrastructure in Tulsa. That's greater than the previous 25 years of street funding combined. So that gives you an idea of the amount of money that the citizens of Tulsa put over the last 5 years into bringing our streets up to an acceptable level. But we also wanted to make this a very public and thorough process and model it after the approach that was used in 2008 to put that program together. And that meant that we would hold 2 series of town hall meetings. The first one to present the list of needs, which is what Gary just outlined. We took those out in early part of this year, in January through March. We held town hall meetings in all 9 city council districts, co-hosted in each district by Mayor Bartlett and the city councilor for that district, to present these high priority needs to the citizens of Tulsa and get feedback on what areas they felt we should really focus on. We took that feedback and came back and then started meeting with department staff to whittle down that $2.5 billion list that Gary mentioned to the amount of money we actually knew we had to work with, which was not $2.5 billion. And ultimately came up with a $919 million number. The vast majority of that goes towards street work. And one thing that I think is always interesting to people, Matt, is to hear how we select those streets. It is not the politicians in the back room figuring out which street is going to get done, but rather it's a system based entirely on analytics, and you might talk about that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilor. Engineering Services is responsible for maintaining a pavement management system for the city of Tulsa. We hire a consultant to go out and inspect the streets on a 5-year basis, both the arterial and non-arterial streets. That information is provided into a computer, and that computer helps us go through and select the best streets to get the best bang for the buck for the money that we spend. So we received an output from the computer. It gave us locations throughout Tulsa. City staff went out and drove those streets to make sure that we were getting good answers out of the computer. We also went out and did logical termini, because the computer only tells us certain segments of streets to work on, and it's not cost economical to only work on that short segment. So we defined logical termini. We went forward with what the councilor and the mayor's office wanted to reach a PCI, which is a pavement condition index of 64 in 2019. And so we used that information to model the streets that we were proposing to do in this package, and we were able to reach that PCI score.
And the pavement condition index that Matt's talking about, it's a system that was developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to rate runways all around the world, so they would have an objective way of evaluating which runways needed repair and maintenance. We take that system and apply it here on our streets in Tulsa, and it allows us to objectively determine what the biggest return on investment is over a given period of time with an amount of money to spend. Now, that's not necessarily always the worst streets, right, Matt?
That's correct. We don't do worst first. The model goes through and it shows the deterioration curve for the street. If you spend money up here while the street has a high PCI score, you can continue to keep that PCI score up. Whereas if you let the street go tail off on the curve, it can be anywhere from 5 to 10 times the amount of money spent on those streets. So that's correct, Councilor.
Well, we had a number of criteria that we used in developing the final proposal list. As I mentioned earlier, one of those was maintaining our commitment at least to the amount of money that was spent over the previous 5 years on streets. A few other areas that we wanted to emphasize. Another was not building new things, but rather focusing on maintaining things that we already have. And with politicians involved, that's always a dangerous thing, because the kind of fun thing is to be able to run for re-election and say, here's something I built, rather than here's something that I helped maintain that someone built 30 years ago. And I was very pleased with the discipline that all of the elected officials showed in this, acknowledging that we have real maintenance needs here at the city of Tulsa, and to focus on maintaining those things that have already been built, rather than going after the glamorous things of building new things. Other thing that we tried to focus on was leveraging public dollars with private dollars wherever we could, and finding opportunities for that. One thing that's different about this proposal versus the last one in 2008, Matt, is that this package contains widening funds, which is a significant need, particularly in South Tulsa. You might talk about how those widening projects are selected and where they are?
Engineering services uses a series of criteria to make a determination on which streets rank the highest priority for the need of widening. There's such things as the capacity or overcapacity of the street, accident history on the street, build out of a corridor if we have adjacent roads that are already widened and suddenly next down to a 2-lane. Factors like that are considered. And we go through and we rank all the arterials in Tulsa that have not already been widened and made up a list. On that list, that's some of those that are included in this package include the widening of Yale from 81st to 91st, the intersection of 101st and Yale, plus from the Creek Turnpike to 101st and Yale. I believe 81st Street between Memorial and Sheridan is also on the list. And also in an effort to move the program forward, we sometimes fund design only so we can get a better understanding of what the costs are going to be for an upcoming funding package. And on this list includes the Gilcrease Museum Road in front of Gilcrease Museum, Pine from Mingo to 169. I believe that's the list.
One of the projects that's in this, we basically, the council and the mayor selected I believe it was the top 4 rated projects that you had based on those criteria. There was one outlier that was still in your top 10, but that is included in this, and that's Riverside Drive between 24th and 33rd. You might talk about why that was bumped up into this package rather than holding it off for later.
Yes, as you mentioned earlier, we look for opportunities to leverage money. The Kaiser Foundation is looking to spend a bunch of $250 million plus or minus on the gathering, and this is an opportunity for us to go ahead and make the improvements on Riverside Drive between 24th and 33rd. It's always more cost efficient to be able to do the work before we would have to go back and build underneath the land bridges they propose.
And that's one of the interesting things about that project. I mean, they're going to be building these, they call them land bridges that will go over Riverside Drive. And so if you can imagine, if you're walking from where the Blair house is right now across that yard, it'll feel like you're going up a hill and you'll have trees on either side and you won't even realize you're walking over Riverside Drive, and you'll come back down and you're facing the river. Now, to build a structure like that, we were basically faced with the option as a city of either we could come back years later and tear up those bridges and drive up our costs on building this, or they could not build those bridges, and neither seemed like a viable option, and this seemed like a good opportunity. At least that was the determination of the council and the mayor in prioritizing this project. We developed that $919 million list of projects based on those criteria, again honing that down from $2.5 billion to $919 million. And then we went out and held another series of town hall meetings, 5 of them in the 4 corners of the city and in Midtown, again to present this project list and hear from people what their thoughts are. And there were a few trends that popped up. And if you'll recall, 5 years ago when we did this, we went out with a billion-dollar, decade-long program, and people immediately, the trend we saw there was people were saying this is too much and too long. And so you go out to these meetings and you look for those types of trends. One, it's important to make sure that we're doing what the public wants with their money, but also at that point you have city councilors and a mayor who've been up to their eyeballs in this for months. And it's very valuable to get a fresh set of eyes on that project list and make sure we're not missing something. And one thing that did pop up and that we did change was funding, capital funding for the BOK Center and the Convention Center. And the reason that citizens raise at these meetings is that there is already a capital fund for those facilities based on the profit that they generate. Can you talk about that?
The BOK Center, our operator that was selected, SMG, has a contract with the city to operate the BOK Center and the Tulsa Convention Center. And through that, they do generate revenues from concessions, rental fees, and for usage of those facilities. And so they, over and above their costs, they do, from their profits, they do have some money that's set aside for a kind of a capital maintenance fund that they can utilize to do improvements as they arise at those facilities. They don't really have the ability to do major scale multi-million dollar projects, but they do have an ability to do limited maintenance that's at a level that's not at a significant multi-million dollar level. So they do have funds available to address those ongoing needs, and they are doing that now. So it made sense for those lower needs to go ahead and take those off the list.
And this was a great example of something that the citizens picked up on, which at least those of us on the council, we missed it. And it shows that the going through the process in that way really is doing it the right way yields benefits like this one. The other thing that we heard repeatedly was a concern about the way that we set up the end date of this proposal. You might talk, Gary, about how this proposal, the sunset on it, if you will, is different than the ones in the recent past here in Tulsa on the sales tax side.
Right. In the Fix Our Streets program, the sales tax portion, which was 1.167%, does expire on June 30 of 2014. And so in that sense, it was a time certain. There was a date that, regardless of what the revenues did in terms of whether we hit our estimates or not hit our estimates, or whether the projects were fully funded or not, the tax would expire, and it does expire, on June 30, 2014. So in this situation, to ensure, and with the council and talking to the public, that to make sure that there was a mechanism to allow for the collection of all of the identified funds, the council chose to not set a date specific, but to allow it to run until all of the dollars were collected. After that time, there was a concern in the public that maybe allowing it just to run without at least some date in the future or some backstop would then be would be a concern that then it could just run forever or something. So there was a compromise that was developed with the leadership of the council to put a time frame that kind of as a backstop that said if within 7 years, if all of the funds had not been collected, then the tax would expire. But the forecasted revenue on the sales tax side of it's $563,700,000. If our projections really have that ending somewhere in the neighborhood of six years, plus or minus a little bit. So we felt like that 7 years, and again, with leadership of the council, is that 7 years would probably allow for that all of the funds would be collected within roughly 6 years, and in a worst case scenario, it might take into that 6th year, but not hit 7 years. So it was sort of a compromise between a date certain, like we've done in the past, and then allowing a more significant amount of time to ensure that all those dollars were collected.
So we made those changes based on the feedback that the citizens gave. And over the course of this entire process, we held 50 public meetings to get input over about an 8 to 9 month period of time. The council was then prepared to vote, and we had sort of a last minute issue come up where a few officials from Tulsa County raised concerns that they would not have capital funding. And that goes back to historically the funding sources that are involved here. And that's an important thing for us to cover today. The funding sources for this all come from the Fix Our Streets program. They are continuations of that program. And Gary, you might talk about what those different funding sources historically were.
As in the past, in this program, there are two primary sources. One is what we call general obligation bonds, which are retired and paid for from property owners' property taxes. And the other element is one we've just discussed, is the sales tax, which is primarily a retail sales tax that people pay, citizens pay when they purchase items at a area retailer. The general obligation bond portion of that is targeted at over 5 years, $355 million. And then, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, the sales tax is estimated, targeted at roughly $563,700,000, and will again run over 5 to 6 years. The property tax side of the program, how that works is we issue bonds over, we get authorization from the voters to issue bonds. So when a voter goes to the polls, what they see on the ballot is, do you authorize the city of Tulsa to issue $355 million in general obligation bonds? And what that means is that we, over a period of 5 years, not all at once, but over 5 years, we will issue up to $355 million. We don't issue that all at once. We issue that a little bit at a time to allow for construction time, design time, and also that we want we want the property tax rate to remain somewhat stable. We don't want to, if we issue a bunch of bonds a large amount, it will spike the property tax rate. So the idea is to issue debt in increments that keeps the property tax rate stable and then allows for us to actually execute the program. And so on the sales tax, it's similar in that it's what we call a pay-as-you-go program. And on the ballot, what it would say was, do you authorize City of Tulsa voters, do you authorize the city to collect a 1.1% sales tax for the purposes of capital improvements? And again, it's targeted at $563 million. And we, as that revenue comes in, the council then appropriates that annually. So we do not appropriate $563 million up front. We do that over somewhere between, in this estimates, between 5.5 and maybe a little over 6 years. So that a little bit a year towards the total list of $563 million.
And you might talk about why, and this came up a lot at our town hall meetings, why are general obligation bonds necessary on the property tax side? And is that something that other cities like Oklahoma City do?
Yeah. Essentially, the property tax or the general obligation bond portion of the program, we have historically funded our capital, a large amount of our capital projects through general obligation bonds. And a lot of that has been, on the street side, has been a big portion of that is residential, doing residential streets. So we feel like there's a very close connection to property taxes and then the street in front of your house. And really, we would not be able to do the level when we went out in the 2008 program. When we heard from the citizens, we really want to fix the streets. Well, we said, and the elected leadership as well as staff said, well, it's going to take a greater commitment to reach that goal, and so that did require a larger portion of general obligation bonds. So it took a commitment on the public, from the public, or willingness from the public to authorize the city to issue that level of bonds that would generate the funds necessary that we need to do the level of street work. So really, we would not be able to. The necessity is that we would not be able to, on the general obligation bond, without the general obligation bonds, to do the level of street work that we promised in 2008 and to continue that progress.
And isn't it true, though, that the only way for us to utilize property taxes for those types of projects is through general obligation bonds?
Yes, sir, that is correct. The city or cities in Oklahoma are restricted from using the property tax for the only thing we can use the property tax for is for the retirement of general obligation bonds.
Okay, and so for the folks who say, well, why don't you do pay as you go like Oklahoma City does? Oklahoma City has a very similar general obligation
Yes, they
bond
do.
program to ours.
Yeah, and they had an authorization, I think, in 2007 that, and I think it was a kind of they got authorization from the voters, and it was a significantly more amount of general obligation bonds than we have authorization for, but it was over a longer period of time. I think it was longer. We do them in 5-year increments, and I think they got authorization from the voters to issue over a 7 or 8 or 10-year period. So the amount was greater, but it was a longer time frame.
Okay.
So, and they have historically used general obligation bonds, just like we do. And I think theirs is primarily nuts and bolts infrastructure, water or sewer, sewer and street projects or flood control projects. So.
Okay. And I know that basically historically the funding sources that went into the Fix Our Street program, which this would continue, it was the general obligation bond. It was what we've always called in Tulsa the third penny sales tax, which was originally put in place by then Mayor and now Senator Jim Inhofe. And then also in 2008, the city took over what had historically been known as the For to Fix the County sales tax, which is 0.167%. In our negotiations with the county to make sure that they would have capital funding available for public safety needs that they have, we agreed to reduce the amount of sales tax that the city would collect under this program from 1.167% down to 1.1. And so when people go to the polls to vote on this, they will see 2 ballot items. One will be for the general obligation bond, and that will be entirely made up of street projects, transportation projects, and then the other will be the 1.1% sales tax rate. Now, the end result of all this process is a $918 million capital improvement program. It's the largest investment in streets in the history of the city. It is also, I believe, the largest investment in parks in the history of the city. Matt, you might talk a bit about what those investments on both sides get us. It's $470 million for street rehab and reconstruction, $88 million for street widening, and then over $30 million in parks.
There is $195 million identified for rehabilitation and rehab and preventive maintenance on the arterial streets. That will be used to do microsurfacing, mill and overlays, along with complete reconstruction or heavy patching and overlays. In addition to that, we have $275 million that we identified to be used on non-arterial streets, which is your regular neighborhood streets. Similar preventive maintenance will be done, and rehab and reconstruction. You make reference to the bridges. There are, I believe, 31 bridges being done, and 4 of those are being replaced. In addition to that, there are 32 park sites, I believe, that we're working on.
Yes.
And that'll include splash pads, 5 pools. They'll also be going in and doing playground and surface, things like that, and moving forward with some of the community centers also. So.
And that's 71% of this proposal will go towards transportation projects within the city of Tulsa. The funding that goes towards parks is really to implement a few different overall strategic changes within that department. One, in the past, Tulsa in the 1960s and 1970s received federal revenue sharing, which allowed us to build and operate park facilities using federal funds which are not available to us today. And so you have throughout the city a lot of smaller facilities that are staffed and have to be staffed and maintained that we simply can't afford to do that anymore. And so we are slowly shifting toward a more regional mega park approach, and this will help us. This money will go towards partly towards that effort, which will allow us to operate a world-class park system in a much more efficient way. This also goes toward replacing a lot of playground equipment that kids play on that has about a 25-year life expectancy, and this will replace 20% of the playground equipment within the city of Tulsa. And it also goes to, we found, Gary, that we can, rather than doing maintenance work on rundown pools, we can spend a little bit more and completely redo them, having zero entry pools, the kind that you see that slope down, that make them much more accessible to small children. And we believe, the counselors and I think the mayor believe, will turn our parks into destination places. The other big funding element in this is for public safety. We identified that there are real needs for building maintenance, both at our fire stations and our police stations. Of course, you're always going to have police cars that need to be replaced. You always have fire trucks that need to be replaced. But one of the really interesting changes here that we identified is that today, if you call in to the police department to report information, whether that's a tip or a crime that you've seen happen, that gets fed into a computer program that was developed in 1976 by City of Tulsa software engineers. Now, setting aside what we know about computers, how they've changed since 1976, you also have the issue of the fact that it was designed solely for the City of Tulsa. And because of that, we don't have the ability to share public safety intelligence in a real-time manner with the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office, with the surrounding suburbs, all of whom use more up-to-date software. This will allow us to do that. Anyone who wants to see the full project list for this proposal can go to tulsacouncil.org. There you can view the project list, and you can also look up, based on your council district, a map that shows all of the streets and all of the other projects that would be done in your part of town. We certainly encourage you to look up that information so you can be informed, and we certainly encourage you to go out and vote on November 12th. Thank you for being with us today.